Hello everybody, my name is Dwayne with Arizona Homesteading, and in this video I'm going to be going over the solar setup for the RV part 2. Also, as a disclaimer, as I said in the first video, I am not an electrician and you shouldn't be following my advice to set up your solar. I have done a lot of research on the subject, but like I said, do it at your own risk. So without further ado, here's part 2. Okay, so let's start here with the generator. So we've been out here for close to a month, not quite yet, but pretty close. We've been out here for 4 weeks, let's say. And this generator we got brand new when we brought it out here. And guess how many hours this thing has on it already? Over 400, about 430 hours is how many hours this generator got from being out here for, like I said, less than a month. Now, it goes without saying that we definitely needed to get the solar set up. And setting up the solar was not only something we wanted to do, but just for cost, it was something we needed to do. So, you know, on one hand, yeah, solar is expensive. There's no doubt about it. But I'll tell you what, running a generator to power an RV is very expensive in the long run. And, you know, to give you an idea, I would say the average of about, I don't know, $12 a day for gas, and not to mention the wear and tear on the generator, because those things don't last forever. And, you know, between that and, you know, just the noise itself of the generator, even a quiet one, you know, it was something that needed to be done. So luckily for me, I had already been researching going off grid for a couple years before we did go off grid, and I already knew that this was something that we were going to need to do. So before we even came out here, I had purchased about 25 batteries and 24 panels, 250 watt panels. Now I got everything used, and the reason was for a couple reasons. Number one, the used panels, honestly, you can get really good used panels for $50 a piece, and that's what I went with. Got them for $50 each, and got these batteries. They're 100 amp hour batteries. They were used, and these were also $50 each. So, you know, yeah, they're used, but everything was tested before we bought it, and I tested the batteries to make sure they had good capacity, tested the panels, and, you know, the only thing that I wouldn't say that I wouldn't go used on would be the components. So all of the hardware, like the, I don't know, not the hardware, but the, you know, like the inverter, charge controller, the wiring, especially the wiring, you know, I didn't go cheap on any of that stuff because that stuff's super important. So anyway, so to get to the batteries here, I'm sitting underneath the RV in the front here of this fifth wheel, and decided to put the batteries in the front compartment for a couple reasons. Number one, they stay nice and shaded down here most of the day. And number two, it's kind of a perfect spot for them. These are AGMs, so what that means is these don't really off gas, and hardly at all unless they get overheated, but they don't off gas, so they're okay in here. And so this thing just closes up, and you could actually stack another set of 12 on top of these if you really wanted to. The only thing you might have to do is you might have to get underneath here and put a support bar across the bottom. There's a couple welded support bars that go across the bottom, so you could carry some weight on this thing. I mean, you wouldn't be able to tow it with all those batteries, but if you were leaving it stationary and you knew it was going to be in a spot for a while, you could actually double this. You could put 24 batteries in here easily. So I have 12. Each one of these is supposedly a 100 amp hour battery, and being that they're AGM lead acid, you can only discharge them up to 50%, and so that gives you about 50 amp hours per battery. Now, the setup that I have is a 48 volt setup, and the reason it's a 48 volt setup is because you can get away with using less wiring, less thick, like you don't have to use as thick a wiring, so it's actually less expensive to go that route. Once you do the research, you'll learn about that. But so to get to the batteries here, we have 4 batteries wired in series, and then there's 3 sets. So basically it's like having 3 48 volt batteries here that are then wired in parallel, and then from here they go and they're wired with a 2-gauge wire, a really thick set of wires that go underneath the RV, under the storage compartment. I put some conduit in there, have it strapped up just like the other conduit that's underneath here, and that runs all the way into the charge controller slash inverter. So I'll show you that in a minute. But you know, like I said, you could go double if you wanted to here. We went with 12 because we're not really going to be living in this RV for a long time, and you know, we don't really want to rely on the batteries completely. So you know, most of our needs are really during the day when it gets hot, the air conditioner, and I'll show you the charge controller slash inverter here in a bit so you can see how that thing's set up. It's kind of neat. So I'm going to go on to the side of the RV now and show you what I did for the wiring here. Okay, so in the first video I showed you the panels. Have 12 panels, 250 watt panels. These are all, this set is wired in series, and this is wired in series, and then they're wired in parallel together because of the specifications of the charge controller inverter. They had to be done this way. I'm actually thinking I might add a couple panels to this to give it a little more power. Being that they're used panels, I get about 80% of the capacity of them. I don't get 250 watts per panel, that's definitely. So I've been monitoring them, and you know, so I would put a couple more if I have time. I might do it today, but eventually I'll put a couple more panels here just so I get a good ratio of charging and usage. So the wiring for these can go directly underground if you get the right type of wiring for these. These are specifically for solar panels, and the wiring is, you can direct bury it, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to direct bury the lines, and they're going to be direct buried all the way up to here. And then once we get up to the RV, this is the setup that I set up out here. So this is a little interesting. This is actually, so obviously you have the solar panel MC4 connectors, and they go into here. So I just put a little, kind of like a junction box here just to hide them. So you can disconnect these panels out here from this. So if I ever want to move this thing, I can just disconnect the panels and that'll be it. No big deal. So kind of had to just, you know, rig it up a little bit to make it work, because it just the way it was. So that's set up there, and this here is the 30 amp plug receptacle, and it's interesting because it'll look like the RV is plugged into itself, which it kind of is. So once you see inside how I did this, so basically I didn't want to mess with a lot of the wiring of the RV itself, and I wanted to keep things simple. And like I said, I didn't want to mess with anything. I just wanted to leave everything as is in the RV as far as the wiring setup, because it already has, you know, a breaker box in it, has everything's fused up and wired nicely, so didn't really want to mess with it. So what I really wanted to do was basically make it to where I could just plug the RV directly into the solar setup and just use it just like plug and play. So that's what you're looking at here. So I'm going to take you inside and show you the goodies. Okay, so I'm in the RV with Bernie, and my wife's on a doctor's appointment, so I got a good chance to make a video in here. So right now I have the computer hooked up to it to show you how it works, but this is where all the magic happens, right here. So in here you got, as you can see, a combiner box. Now I'm going to show you the combiner box and just tell you right out of the gate that this is complete overkill for the setup I have. This is definitely something you don't need to have. This is actually for a much bigger array that I'm going to be using, so I just didn't have the fuses for the MC4 connections. Like, they make these inline fuses for the solar panels, and I'll just be getting some of those and wiring them up, and basically this box is going to be taken out of here soon. But since it's what I had on hand, I figured I might as well use it. So there it is. Now it looks pretty intimidating when you look at this thing, but really it's just fuses, and you just hook these up and there's directions on it, and it's pretty simple, but it's a nice box here to keep everything organized. So I'm going to close that up. But going over to the computer here, this here is a little bit of software that came with this unit, and this is a Grow Watt off-grid inverter is what it's called. And this is an all-in-one inverter, charge controller. It's all built into one unit, so it's really neat. This right here is just basic monitoring software where I can just click on here and I can see, you know, what's going on here, to see like, okay, right now I'm getting about 2,000 watts from the panels, and the batteries are at about 75%. They're being charged, and just a couple other things here that you can look at. But it's really cool, so you can just pop this on and just take a look at everything, make sure everything's working the way you want it to, and you know, go from there, and you can troubleshoot real easily. So I'm going to close this up now, talk about this setup over here. So over here, I mentioned that my neighbor, one of my neighbors he's a retired electrician. So I had him come over here and just look at everything and make sure I was doing things properly, so you know I don't burn this place down. So, you know, he gave me some good pointers, and even though he doesn't know a lot about solar, you know, the basic wiring and the fundamentals of that was still very helpful, and that helped me out a lot. So what you're looking at here is, I'll talk about this stuff and then I'll talk about the unit, the inverter. So this is just simply a sub panel for the 30 amp receptacle outside, basically for the RV plug. So this is just a breaker switch. So basically the RV, that plug outside, it's plugged in, the RV's plugged in, but it's just plugged in through this inverter, and this inverter is getting, you know, energy from the panels and the batteries. So really it's cool because it looks like it's plugged into itself, but it's just plugged into the solar setup. This here is just simply a kill switch for the batteries. So if I ever need to shut down the batteries, I can just click this and it'll shut them down instantly. And everything is, you know, run with some good conduit underneath here, so you know rats and stuff can't chew it up. So that's that setup. And then basically I'm gonna put some type of maybe screen over this just for safety, but no one's really gonna be in here except for, you know, my 16-year-old and myself and my wife, so, and he'll know not to mess with this stuff. So let's go to the Grow Watt. Now this is a Grow Watt. It's called an all-in-one, and basically instead of getting a charge controller and then getting an inverter, you have everything in one unit, which is really cool for someone like me who's not like an expert on solar. And I just, you know, I wanted something simple but effective, and that's what this thing is. Now what's cool about this thing is it's about, I think, $750 for this unit, and this has a capacity of 3,000 watts. So you know, you could do a really, like an RV, it's perfect for an RV. So you can do an RV with this thing no problem, okay, and plenty to spare. So the most this RV will take out of this thing when I'm running the microwave is maybe 60%. So it'll run at about 60 to 65% capacity with the microwave on. So that's it. But what's cool about this unit is there are settings on it to where you can set it to where basically you just run off of solar panels and nothing else. So if you don't have a huge battery bank, you can actually set this up to just run off of solar. So there's a lot of applications for this thing. It's really neat, and you know, it wasn't tremendously expensive for what it does, you know. And I got it from this place, watts247.com, and the guy was really helpful. I think his name's Ian, but yeah, he's really helpful. And you know, he was, I had questions, I'd text the guy, and you know, he would get back to me sooner or later. And one thing happened was I actually got a couple of these units, and I have another one for another setup, and one of them got broke in the mail. The mail company must have dropped it or something because it was damaged, and I sent it back, and it was instantly, he sent out another unit before I even sent that one back to him. So you know, took care of me real quick, and you know, I have no complaints about that place. So I got this thing set up, and you know, it works good. So that's the setup, folks, and you know, it's pretty simple, and I'm getting, you know, all the RV power from this. Ran it yesterday with just this and the batteries at night. I would say if you're gonna go completely 100% RV, I would probably up your battery bank a little bit, maybe up the panels a little bit too, but the battery bank especially if you're gonna be, you know, using the air conditioning all night. But we don't really use it that much at night, so good to go. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon.